The entire kingdom feared for its king. The words traveled through Blackwood Castle like a shadow. No servant dared speak too loudly. For years, Alpha King Lucas Blackwood had carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. But lately, even the strongest wolf in the realm seemed exhausted. Advisors whispered behind closed doors. Royal physicians arrived from distant territories. Healers brought rare herbs and ancient remedies. Nothing changed. Nothing helped. Lucas slept only in brief moments, never long enough to find real rest. Day after day, night after night, he walked the halls of his castle with the same calm expression while exhaustion slowly settled deeper behind his silver eyes. From the outside, he remained the perfect ruler. Inside, he felt as though something important had been missing for a very long time. On a cold autumn evening, rain lashed against the castle windows while thunder rolled across the mountains surrounding the capital. Lucas sat alone in his private study reviewing reports by candlelight. The numbers blurred together. Trade agreements, harvest records, border updates, important matters that deserved his attention. Yet his mind drifted farther away with every passing hour. A knock sounded at the door. Enter. Lord Nathan Reed stepped inside, carrying another stack of documents. Unlike most people in the kingdom, Nathan had known Lucas long enough to recognize what others missed. He placed the reports on the desk and studied his friend carefully. You have not slept again. Lucas offered a faint smile. Apparently, everyone has become an expert on my sleeping habits. Nathan did not smile back. The council is worried. The council is always worried. This time they may have a reason. Silence settled between them. Rain continued tapping against the glass. Nathan lowered his voice. You cannot continue like this forever. Lucas looked toward the dark city beyond the window. Thousands of lights glowed beneath the storm. Families gathered around dinner tables. Children slept peacefully in warm homes. Life continued across the kingdom exactly as it should. Yet the king who protected all of it could not remember the last time he felt truly at peace. I know, Lucas said quietly. Nathan wanted to say more, but stopped himself. Some problems could not be solved with advice. After a few moments, he nodded and left the room. Alone once again, Lucas stood and walked toward the window. Lightning illuminated the skyline for a brief instant. The storm seemed endless. So did the emptiness he carried. Somewhere deep inside, his wolf felt restless. Not angry, not dangerous, simply unsettled, as though it were waiting for something neither of them could understand. Hours later, the castle finally grew quiet. Servants retired to their quarters. Hallways emptied. Candles burned low. Yet Lucas remained awake. He leaned against the window frame and watched rain fall across the kingdom he loved. For the first time in many years, a strange thought crossed his mind. What if the thing he had been searching for was not a cure, a remedy, or an answer hidden inside old books? What if it was a person he had not met yet? The idea disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Still, somewhere beyond the castle walls, beyond the storm and the darkness, destiny had already begun moving toward him, even if neither of them knew it yet. On the far side of Blackwood Castle, hidden beyond the royal gardens and marble courtyards, stood a sprawling greenhouse that most nobles never visited. Rows of flowering plants stretched beneath glass ceilings while herbs, medicinal roots, and rare blossoms filled the warm air with gentle fragrance. This was where Grace Bennet spent most of her days. At 23 years old, she had become nearly invisible to the people around her. Servants passed her without learning her name. Officials barely remembered she existed. Even among the workers who maintained the royal grounds, Grace was often overlooked. She preferred it that way. The greenhouse offered something she valued more than attention. It offered peace. Every morning before sunrise, she arrived carrying baskets and gardening tools. She watered delicate seedlings, trimmed dying leaves, and carefully recorded the condition of every plant. While the rest of the castle rushed through meetings, ceremonies, and political concerns, Grace spent her days helping things grow. The work was simple, but she loved it. One cool autumn morning, sunlight filtered through the glass roof as she arranged pots of lavender along a stone walkway. Nearby, two workers loaded crates for transport to the castle kitchens. Did you hear about the king? One asked quietly. The other nodded. Everyone has. Grace kept her attention on the flowers. News about Alpha King Lucas Blackwood traveled through every corner of the castle. Even people who rarely entered the main building knew he had not been resting well. The physicians are still trying, the first worker continued. My cousin works near the royal wing. He says nobody can help him. The second worker sighed. I cannot imagine carrying that kind of responsibility. Their voices faded as they walked away. Grace looked toward the distant silhouette of the castle towers visible through the greenhouse windows. She had seen the king only once from afar during a public ceremony years earlier. Like everyone else, she respected him. Unlike many others, she felt sorry for him. Great power often looked glamorous from a distance. Up close, it seemed lonely. The thought stayed with her throughout the afternoon. Later, while organizing supplies in a storage room, Grace discovered an injured songbird trapped beneath a fallen crate. Carefully lifting the wooden box, she freed the trembling creature and carried it outside. The bird hesitated on her palm before finally taking flight into the bright sky. Grace smiled softly as she watched it disappear. Small moments like that always brightened her day. By evening, dark clouds gathered above the kingdom once again. Workers hurried to finish their tasks before the approaching storm arrived. Grace remained behind longer than usual to secure delicate plants inside the greenhouse. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Wind rattled the glass panels overhead. When she finally finished, the rain had already begun. Standing alone among rows of flowers, Grace looked toward the castle where warm lights glowed through hundreds of windows. Somewhere inside those walls, a king struggled through another sleepless night. Somewhere inside these gardens, an unnoticed Omega prepared to walk directly into the path of destiny without realizing it. The storm arrived faster than anyone expected. By nightfall, rain hammered the glass roof of the greenhouse so fiercely that workers were ordered to leave early and return to their quarters. Wind swept through the royal grounds, bending trees and rattling windows throughout the castle. Grace gathered her tools and prepared to leave, but as she stepped outside, a castle steward hurried across the courtyard carrying a lantern. You cannot return to the servant cottages tonight, he called above the storm. Grace paused. Why not? The eastern path is flooded. The bridge is closed until morning. She looked toward the darkness beyond the gardens. The rain had already transformed the pathways into streams of rushing water. The steward sighed. Temporary accommodations have been arranged inside the castle, just for the night. Grace blinked in surprise. She had worked near the castle for years without ever spending a night inside its walls. Follow me, the steward said. We need everyone accounted for before the weather gets worse. Moments later, Grace found herself walking through corridors lined with portraits, chandeliers, and polished stone floors. Everything felt impossibly grand compared to the simple greenhouse where she spent most of her days. Servants moved quickly through the hallways while guards secured entrances against the storm outside. Thunder echoed through the castle like distant drums. Eventually, the steward stopped outside a small guest room. You can stay here until morning. Grace thanked him and stepped inside. The room was modest by royal standards, but far more luxurious than anything she had ever known. A warm fire burned quietly in the hearth. Fresh blankets rested on the bed. Rain tapped softly against the windows. For the first time all day, she relaxed. Meanwhile, several floors above, Lucas stood in his private chamber staring at the storm. Sleep felt as distant as ever. Despite his exhaustion, his thoughts refused to settle. He had spent the evening attempting to read, then reviewing reports, then walking the corridors. Nothing worked. The restlessness remained. Another flash of lightning illuminated the city below. Then something unexpected happened. A strange calm brushed against the edge of his awareness. It lasted only a second, just long enough to make him pause. Lucas frowned. The feeling was unfamiliar. Gentle, quiet, almost comforting. Before he could understand it, the sensation disappeared. Yet unlike previous nights, the tension inside him had eased slightly. Curious, he sat beside the fireplace. Minutes passed, then an hour. The storm continued raging beyond the castle walls. Somewhere nearby, hidden among hundreds of rooms and countless residents, Grace sat reading beside her own fire while rain drummed against the windows. Neither knew anything about the other. Neither realized how close they were. Eventually, for the first time in longer than Lucas could remember, his eyes grew heavy. The restless energy that usually kept him awake seemed strangely absent. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Down the hallways, servants settled into their rooms. The castle gradually fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Inside, destiny quietly moved 2 lives closer together. And while Grace drifted peacefully to sleep in her temporary room, the Alpha King finally surrendered to the deepest and most peaceful sleep he had experienced in years. Morning sunlight spilled across Blackwood Castle as if the storm had never happened. Golden light streamed through tall windows, warming stone corridors that had echoed with thunder only hours earlier. Grace opened her eyes slowly and sat up in the unfamiliar guest room. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then the elegant furnishings and distant castle bells reminded her. The storm had passed. She dressed quickly, eager to return to the greenhouse before anyone noticed how out of place she felt among royal guests. As she stepped into the hallway, servants hurried past carrying breakfast trays and fresh flowers. Yet something felt different. Conversations seemed unusually animated. Curious whispers followed her through the corridor. "Have you heard?" one servant quietly asked another. "He slept through the entire night." Grace frowned but continued walking. She had no idea who they were discussing. Several floors above, the castle's senior advisors gathered around a long table in stunned disbelief. Nathan Reed stood beside the window, watching the reactions unfold. Across from him sat royal physicians who looked as though they had witnessed a miracle. 9 hours, one of them said, without interruption. Another shook his head. That has not happened in years. At the head of the table, Lucas listened quietly. Unlike previous mornings, he felt rested. Not temporarily better, truly rested. The exhaustion that had haunted him for so long seemed strangely distant. Even his thoughts felt clearer. The difference was so dramatic that everyone in the room noticed immediately. Nathan folded his arms. "How do you feel?" Lucas considered the question. "Like I finally woke up." The room fell silent. No one knew how to respond. Physicians exchanged hopeful glances. Advisors looked relieved. Yet Lucas remained focused on a single detail. He could not explain why the change had happened. Throughout breakfast meetings and official appointments, the question remained in the back of his mind. What had been different about last night? Meanwhile, Grace arrived at the greenhouse and resumed her usual routine. She watered seedlings, inspected herbs, and organized supply records. The familiar work quickly settled her nerves. Yet several co-workers seemed distracted. "The entire castle is celebrating," one gardener said while arranging flower trays. Apparently, the king finally slept. Another worker smiled. Maybe the physicians finally found the answer. Grace glanced toward the distant castle towers visible beyond the greenhouse glass. Something about the timing felt oddly curious. She remembered the strange sense of calm she had experienced the previous evening despite the storm. The feeling had been comforting, almost as if the world had briefly fallen into perfect balance. She dismissed the thought and returned to her work. By late afternoon, Lucas found himself retracing every detail of the previous night. The storm, the quiet, the unusual calm. Then he remembered something else. The sensation had begun shortly after additional castle guests were brought inside because of the weather. A small observation, perhaps meaningless, yet his instincts refused to let it go. Standing beside a palace window overlooking the gardens, he watched workers moving between greenhouses and courtyards below. Somewhere among the countless lives surrounding him, a missing piece of a puzzle had appeared. He did not know what it was. He did not know who it was. But for the first time in years, hope felt less like a distant dream and more like something waiting just beyond the next door. For the next several days, Lucas could think about little else. Every morning, he woke feeling more rested than the day before. The difference was impossible to ignore. Advisors celebrated. Physicians congratulated themselves. The council spoke hopefully about the future. Yet Lucas remained unconvinced that medicine deserved the credit. Something had changed on the night of the storm, and his instincts insisted the answer was hidden somewhere inside the castle grounds. One afternoon, he left the royal wing without announcing his destination. Nathan quickly caught up with him in the corridor. "You are investigating again." Lucas almost smiled. "I am taking a walk." "Of course you are." Together they crossed the gardens beneath a sky painted with soft autumn sunlight. Workers trimmed hedges. Servants carried baskets of flowers between buildings. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet the moment Lucas approached the greenhouse district, the strange sense of calm returned. It settled over him like warm sunlight after a long winter. He stopped walking. Nathan immediately noticed. What is it? Lucas looked toward the largest greenhouse at the far end of the path. There, without understanding why, he continued forward. Inside, Grace was arranging pots of lavender near a long stone table. The greenhouse smelled of herbs, fresh soil, and blooming flowers. Sunlight filtered through glass panels overhead, creating golden patterns across the floor. She had spent the entire morning working quietly, unaware that the king himself was approaching. Nearby workers suddenly straightened when they noticed royal guards entering the garden path outside. Whispers spread through the greenhouse. Grace looked up in confusion just as Lucas stepped through the doorway. The room immediately fell silent. Grace froze. For a moment she thought she must be imagining it. The Alpha King rarely visited this area of the estate. Yet there he stood only a few feet away. Lucas surveyed the greenhouse calmly, but the peaceful feeling growing inside him became stronger with every step. His gaze moved across rows of flowers before finally settling on Grace. Something inside him immediately grew still. Not excitement, not surprise. Peace. Genuine peace. The sensation was so unexpected that he simply stood there looking at her. Grace lowered her eyes respectfully. "Your Majesty." Her voice was soft but steady. Lucas felt the strange calm deepen. Around them, workers exchanged curious glances. Nobody understood why the king seemed suddenly interested in a greenhouse worker. Even Nathan looked puzzled. "You work here?" Lucas asked. Grace nodded. "Yes, Your Majesty." "How long?" "Almost 4 years." Lucas glanced around the greenhouse. "You take good care of it." Grace blinked in surprise. Few people ever noticed her work. "Thank you." For several seconds neither spoke. Yet the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling while a gentle breeze moved between the flowers. Lucas realized something important. The feeling he had searched for since the storm was here. Not in the building. Not in the gardens. In her presence. And for the first time, Grace felt an unfamiliar warmth settle quietly inside her own heart as destiny began revealing the answer neither of them had been expecting. The days that followed felt different for both of them, though neither fully understood why. Lucas found himself visiting the greenhouse more often than any member of the royal court considered normal. At first, he created practical reasons. He wanted updates on rare medicinal plants. He wanted reports about seasonal harvests. He wanted to inspect improvements to the royal gardens. Yet every excuse led him back to the same place. Every path somehow ended beside rows of flowers where Grace quietly worked beneath sunlight, filtering through glass ceilings. The strangest part was how natural it felt. One afternoon, Lucas arrived to find Grace carefully replanting young rose bushes near the western section of the greenhouse. She looked up in surprise when she noticed him approaching. "Your Majesty." Lucas smiled faintly. "You do not need to sound surprised every time you see me." A hint of amusement appeared in her eyes. "I am still getting used to it." Lucas glanced around the greenhouse. "So am I." The unexpected answer made her laugh softly. The sound caught him completely off guard. It was simple and genuine, untouched by politics, expectations, or formal court behavior. For reasons he could not explain, hearing it made the entire day seem brighter. Meanwhile, rumors spread through the castle. Servants whispered. Advisors exchanged curious looks. Even Nathan eventually confronted him while they walked through the royal gardens. "You realize everyone has noticed." Lucas pretended ignorance. "Noticed what?" Nathan laughed. "That you suddenly care a great deal about flowers." Lucas looked toward the greenhouse visible across the lawn. "Perhaps I have developed new interests. Or perhaps your interests have a name." Lucas did not answer. The silence itself was answer enough. While others speculated, Grace remained unaware of how much attention their growing friendship attracted. She simply enjoyed the conversations. Unlike most nobles, Lucas listened when she spoke. He asked questions about plants, weather patterns, and greenhouse projects. He remembered details. He treated her opinions as though they mattered. Few people had ever done that before. One evening, they found themselves walking through the castle gardens as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and amber. Birds settled into nearby trees while fountains reflected the fading light. For several minutes, they walked in comfortable silence. Then Grace spoke quietly. "Can I ask you something?" Lucas nodded. "Anything." She hesitated before continuing. "Why do you keep coming back?" The question surprised him because he had been asking himself the same thing for weeks. He looked toward the horizon where the city glowed beneath the evening sky. Because when I am here, everything feels quieter. Grace studied him carefully. There was no arrogance in his voice. No royal authority. Just honesty. Lucas continued. For years I felt like I was searching for something without knowing what it was. He met her eyes. Now I am beginning to think I was simply looking in the wrong places. A warm breeze moved through the gardens, carrying the scent of flowers between them. Neither spoke for a moment. Yet both felt the same undeniable truth settling quietly into place. What had begun as a mystery was becoming something deeper, something neither expected, something destiny had been guiding toward from the very beginning. As autumn gradually gave way to early winter, the castle could no longer ignore what was happening. The king was healthier than he had been in years. He slept peacefully. He smiled more often. Meetings ended on time instead of stretching late into the night. Even the atmosphere within Blackwood Castle seemed lighter. Yet the improvement brought new questions. The council wanted explanations. The nobles wanted answers. And eventually, those answers led them to Grace Bennet. One cold morning, Grace arrived at the greenhouse to find several unfamiliar officials waiting near the entrance. Their expensive clothing immediately revealed their status. The moment she approached, conversation stopped. One noblewoman studied her openly before speaking. So this is the gardener. Grace felt uncomfortable under their attention. I work in the royal greenhouse. The woman offered a polite smile that never reached her eyes. Of course, the group soon departed, but the encounter left an uneasy feeling behind. Throughout the day, similar moments followed. People who had never noticed her before suddenly wanted to know everything. Where she came from, how long she had worked at the castle, why the king spent so much time near the gardens. Grace answered politely, yet she found herself missing the quiet anonymity she had once enjoyed. Meanwhile, Lucas faced growing pressure from the council. During an afternoon meeting, one advisor finally spoke what everyone else had been thinking. Your Majesty, the kingdom deserves clarity. Lucas looked up from the documents on his desk. About what? The older man hesitated. About the young woman. Silence filled the chamber. Several council members exchanged nervous glances. Nathan leaned back in his chair, already anticipating the conversation. She is a greenhouse worker, another advisor said carefully. With respect, people are beginning to talk. Lucas remained calm. People have always talked. This is different. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Lucas set down his pen. Perhaps it is. The admission surprised everyone. Even Lucas seemed thoughtful afterward. Because the truth was becoming impossible to deny. His connection to Grace was changing him. Not through power. Not through obligation. Through peace. Through trust. Through a feeling he had spent years searching for without realizing it. Later that evening, Lucas found Grace tending winter flowers inside the greenhouse. Snowflakes drifted gently beyond the glass walls while lanterns cast warm golden light across the rows of plants. Grace smiled when she saw him, but he immediately noticed the concern behind it. Something is bothering you, he said. Grace looked down at the flower she was trimming. People keep asking questions. Lucas understood instantly. Because of me. She did not answer, which was answer enough. For several moments they stood quietly among the flowers. Then Grace spoke softly. I do not understand why everyone suddenly cares who I am. Lucas looked at her with an expression filled with quiet certainty. Because they are finally paying attention to what should have mattered all along. Grace met his eyes. The words settled deeply inside her. All her life, she had been overlooked, forgotten, dismissed. Yet standing there beneath the lantern light, she realized something remarkable. The most powerful man in the kingdom saw her more clearly than anyone ever had. And somewhere beyond the greenhouse walls, destiny was preparing to reveal why. Winter settled fully over the kingdom, covering the castle grounds in a blanket of white that transformed every garden, pathway, and courtyard into something almost magical. Yet beneath the beauty, tension continued to grow. The council had become increasingly vocal about Grace. What had once been whispered in private conversations was now openly discussed in formal meetings. Some advisors worried about tradition. Others worried about appearances. A few simply disliked anything they could not control. Lucas listened to every concern with remarkable patience, but his position never changed. One snowy afternoon, the council gathered inside the royal chamber beneath towering windows overlooking the city. The discussion quickly returned to the subject everyone expected. Your Majesty, one senior noble began carefully. The kingdom requires stability. Lucas remained calm. I agree. Encouraged, the noble continued. Then surely you understand why many people are concerned. Concerned about what? Lucas asked, though he already knew the answer. The noble exchanged glances with several others before speaking. About the influence of a greenhouse worker becoming so closely connected to the throne. Silence settled across the room. Nathan watched from the side, studying Lucas carefully. The king leaned back in his chair. Influence is earned by character, not by title. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Another advisor spoke up. With respect, tradition exists for a reason. Lucas looked toward the winter landscape beyond the windows. Tradition should guide us toward wisdom. It should not prevent us from recognizing it. The room fell silent once more. Nobody had a response prepared for that. Later that evening, Grace remained in the greenhouse long after most workers had gone home. Snow drifted softly outside the glass walls while lanterns cast warm light across rows of winter flowers. She had always loved this time of day. The quiet allowed her thoughts to settle. Yet recently her thoughts seemed impossible to organize. Too much had changed. Too many people suddenly knew her name. She was trimming a small flowering plant when footsteps approached. She smiled before even looking up. Somehow she always recognized Lucas. Long day, she asked. Very. He moved beside her and looked at the flowers. The council again? Grace guessed. Lucas laughed softly. Am I that predictable? Only when you arrive looking like you have been arguing for hours. The smile that followed surprised both of them. Over the past months, conversations that once felt impossible had become effortless. They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Grace looked down at the flower in her hands. Sometimes I wonder if all this attention would disappear if people remembered who I really am. Lucas frowned slightly. And who is that? Grace hesitated. Just an ordinary Omega who works with plants. Lucas turned toward her fully. You are the woman who brought peace back into my life when no one else could. Grace looked up in surprise. There was no hesitation in his voice. No uncertainty. Only truth. Snow continued falling beyond the glass, while warm lantern light reflected in their eyes. In that quiet greenhouse, far from politics and expectations, both of them understood something important. Whatever challenges waited ahead, neither intended to face them alone. And for the first time, Lucas was ready to let the entire kingdom know it. Winter eventually surrendered to spring, and with the changing season came a change throughout the entire kingdom. The snow melted from castle rooftops. Flowers returned to the royal gardens. Sunlight once again filled the greenhouse where everything had begun. Yet the greatest transformation was not found in the weather. It was found in the people. Months earlier, many had questioned Grace Bennet. Some had dismissed her. Others had wondered why the king spent so much time with a woman who held no title and sought no attention. Now those same people witnessed something impossible to ignore. Lucas Blackwood was no longer the exhausted ruler who wandered sleepless through endless nights. He was stronger, calmer, and happier than anyone could remember. The change touched every corner of the kingdom. Council meetings became more productive. Royal celebrations returned. Citizens noticed the difference even if they did not understand its source. One bright spring morning, the castle hosted a gathering attended by nobles, advisors, merchants, and representatives from across the realm. The great hall sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers, while sunlight streamed through towering windows. Grace stood near one of the garden entrances, feeling slightly overwhelmed by the crowd. She still preferred flowers to formal events. Lucas noticed immediately and crossed the room toward her. You look like you would rather be in the greenhouse. Grace laughed softly. Is it that obvious? Only to me. The warmth in his voice drew a smile from her. Nearby guests watched the exchange with curiosity, but for the first time Grace no longer felt uncomfortable. She had spent her entire life believing she was easy to overlook. Lucas had changed that without ever trying. Later that afternoon, the king addressed the gathering. The hall gradually fell silent as everyone turned toward him. Lucas looked across the crowd before speaking. For many years, people searched for ways to help me find peace. The room listened attentively. Physicians offered remedies. Advisors offered solutions. Friends offered support. He paused briefly, yet the answer arrived from a place no one expected. His gaze found Grace standing among the guests. Sometimes the most valuable people are the ones others fail to notice. A quiet murmur spread through the hall. Lucas continued, "Character matters more than status. Kindness matters more than reputation. And true strength often appears in the gentlest hearts." Grace felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. Throughout her life, nobody had spoken about her with such respect. The gathering ended beneath applause and celebration. As evening approached, Lucas and Grace walked together through the royal gardens. Flowers bloomed along every path. Birds sang from nearby trees. The kingdom stretched before them, glowing beneath the golden light of sunset. They stopped beside the greenhouse where their story had truly begun. Grace smiled as she looked through the glass walls at rows of healthy flowers. "Everything seems different now." Lucas looked at her. "Some things are exactly the same." "Like what?" she asked. He smiled. "You still make every place better simply by being there." For a moment neither spoke. They simply stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. The future remained unwritten, but neither feared it anymore. The lonely king had finally found peace. The overlooked Omega had finally found the place where she belonged. And together they proved that destiny often chooses the people the world forgets first, because those are the people capable of changing everything.